Centuries had passed since a human last wielded the most dangerous magic known to the world. Haima, the blood magic, was a relic of a bygone era, a power so feared and reviled that its practitioners had been hunted to extinction, or so it was believed. The gods themselves had decreed it forbidden, and the mortal kingdoms had enforced that decree with fire and sword. Yet, as Naunun stood on the black sand beaches of Zerahn, the diviner's wheel spinning in his hands, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him like a storm cloud. The wheel slowed, its 7 spokes, each carved into the likeness of a god, creaking to a halt. His heart sank as the needle pointed to the one spoke he had prayed it would not touch. Haima, the boy, Cayrin, stood before him, his wide eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and fear. He was just a child, no older than 10, with the sun-kissed skin of a coastal dweller and a mop of dark hair that clung to his forehead in the humid air. His mother, a stout woman with the air of someone who had never been denied what she wanted, clapped her hands together in excitement. "What does it say, Master Naunun? Tell me my boy will be an enchanter. Imagine what he could do with the nets, the carts." Naunun's jaw tightened. He forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "A moment, please. The wheel does not lie, but it takes its time to reveal the truth." His voice was calm, but his mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Not after so long. The wheel had spoken. Cayrin was marked by Haima, the blood magic. Naunun's stomach churned as he considered the implications. If the truth were discovered, the boy would be killed, or worse, taken by the Academy for experimentation. The gods' children, the Thaid, would not tolerate such a threat to their order. And yet, as Naunun looked into Cayrin's innocent face, he felt a pang of guilt. This child had done nothing wrong. He was simply born with a curse disguised as a gift. With a flick of his wrist, Naunun channeled a sliver of his own magic into the wheel. It was a violation of divine law, a crime punishable by death, but he had no choice. The needle shifted, landing on the plain spoke that indicated a lack of magical talent. The boy's mother gasped, her face falling as if the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders. No, that can't be right. Try again, Master Naunun. Please." Naunun shook his head, his expression somber. "The wheel does not err. Your son has no natural talent for magic. But do not despair. He can still learn to wield enchanted tools. With time and effort, he may yet find his place." The woman's disappointment was palpable, but she nodded reluctantly. Cayrin, however, was not so easily fooled. His sharp eyes met Naunun's, and for a moment, the diviner felt as though the boy could see straight through his deception. There was a wisdom in those eyes, a quiet understanding that belied his age. Naunun's heart ached. He had seen that look before in the faces of other children who had not survived the path they were forced to walk. 3 years had passed since that fateful day. Naunun had taken Cayrin under his wing, teaching him the art of enchantment to mask his true potential. The boy had proven to be a quick study, his nimble fingers crafting intricate sigils and his mind grasping the complexities of spellwork with ease. But beneath the surface, the Haima bloodline simmered, a dormant force waiting to be unleashed. Naunun watched as Cayrin approached, holding a live crab in one hand and an enchanter's burin in the other. The boy's face was alight with excitement, his cheeks flushed from running along the beach. "Naun, look what I caught." Naunun's lips twitched in a faint smile, though his eyes remained wary. "And how, pray tell, did you manage that?" "With the tools, of course." Cayrin held up the burin, its tip glowing faintly with residual magic. The crab's shell bore a small sigil, a mark of the boy's handiwork. Naunun sighed, taking the crab from Cayrin's grasp. With a wave of his hand, he dispelled the enchantment, allowing the creature to scuttle back into the surf. "You must not waste your talents on such frivolities, Cayrin. Your father expects you to craft tools for the fishery, not play with crustaceans." Cayrin's face fell, but he nodded obediently. "Yes, Master Naunun." The sound of footsteps drew Naunun's attention. He turned to see his other students approaching. Sasi, a human girl with a sharp tongue and sharper wit. Han Tom, a merchant's son with a penchant for mischief, and Vivia, a shy lane whose drooping ears and jingling earrings made her seem perpetually lost in thought. They were an odd group, but Naunun had chosen them carefully. Each had their own strengths, their own secrets, and each, in their own way, was a potential threat to Cayrin's safety. "Bastard boy!" Haima called out, breaking into a run as he spotted Cayrin. The two collided in a flurry of laughter and sand, their camaraderie a stark contrast to the tension that simmered beneath the surface. Naunun's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the towering walls of Heru Academy loomed like a specter. The academy was a place of learning, yes, but also of power, and power in the wrong hands could be deadly. He had spent years within those walls, teaching and learning, until the weight of his secrets had driven him away. Now, as he stood on the beach with his students, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The cold knot in his stomach returned, twisting tighter with each passing moment. He had seen the signs, the whispers among the Thaid, the restless energy that seemed to permeate the air. The preceptors were growing suspicious, their eyes turning toward him and his students. How long would it be before they discovered the truth? How long before Cayrin's bloodline was exposed? Naunun clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He had made a choice that day on the hill, a choice to protect a child who had done nothing wrong. But as the shadows lengthened and the wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the village, he couldn't help but wonder if he had damned them all. The days grew shorter, and the air carried the faint chill of approaching autumn. Naunun's lessons with his students became more frequent, their sessions stretching late into the evening as he pushed them to hone their skills. Cayrin, in particular, had shown remarkable progress. His enchantments were precise, his control over the arcane tools nearly flawless. But Naunun could see the restlessness in the boy's eyes, the way his fingers twitched when he thought no one was looking. It was the same restlessness Naunun had seen in himself long ago, when the weight of forbidden knowledge had first settled on his shoulders. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky burned with hues of orange and purple, Naunun gathered his students on the beach. The black sand shimmered faintly in the fading light, and the waves whispered secrets only the sea could understand. He held a small, polished stone in his hand, its surface etched with intricate runes. "Today," he began, his voice low and measured, "you will learn to create an animate. This is no simple enchantment. It requires focus, precision, and an understanding of the life force that flows through all things. Fail, and the stone will remain lifeless. Succeed, and it will move as though it has a will of its own." The students leaned in, their eyes wide with anticipation. Cayrin's gaze lingered on the stone, his expression unreadable. Naunun handed the stone to Sasi first, guiding her through the process of channeling her magic into the runes. She hesitated at first, her hands trembling, but soon the stone began to glow faintly, its surface pulsing with a soft, golden light. It twitched, then rolled across the sand of its own accord. "Well done," Naunun said, though his praise was tempered by the unease in his chest. He turned to Haima next, repeating the process. The merchant's son fumbled with the runes, his impatience getting the better of him, but eventually, the stone shuddered to life, wobbling unsteadily before falling still. When it was Cayrin's turn, Naunun hesitated. He could feel the boy's magic, a faint hum beneath the surface, like a storm waiting to break. "Remember," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "control is everything. Do not let your emotions guide you." Cayrin nodded, his fingers brushing against the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the runes flared to life, their light so bright it nearly blinded them. The stone shot into the air, spinning wildly before crashing back into the sand. The other students gasped, their eyes wide with awe. "How did you do that?" Haima demanded, his voice tinged with envy. Cayrin shrugged, though his cheeks flushed with pride. "I just focused." Naunun's stomach churned. He had seen that kind of power before in the hands of those who had been touched by Haima. It was raw, untamed, and dangerous. He forced a smile, though it felt hollow. "Impressive, Cayrin. But remember, power without control is a liability." You must learn to temper it. The boy nodded, but Naunun could see the spark of curiosity in his eyes. It was the same spark that had led him to experiment with his bloodline, to nearly burst a vein in his arm during one of their private lessons. Naunun had managed to explain the injury away as an accident, but he knew it was only a matter of time before Cayrin's curiosity got the better of him. The festival of conjuration arrived, bringing with it a wave of excitement and tension. The villagers of Ivon and Ors gathered on the black beaches, their festival barges adorned with lanterns and ribbons. The air was thick with the scent of salt and roasted meats, and the sound of laughter and music echoed across the shore. Naunun stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes scanning the faces of his students as they mingled with the villagers. Cayrin was among them, his laughter ringing out as he played a game of chance with Hantome and Sasi. Vivia lingered nearby, her ears twitching as she watched the festivities with a mixture of awe and discomfort. Naunun's gaze lingered on Cayrin, his heart heavy with the weight of his secret. The boy was happy, carefree, but Naunun knew it wouldn't last. The world was not kind to those who were different. As the night deepened, Naunun felt a presence at his side. He turned to see a tall, cloaked figure standing beside him, their face obscured by the shadows of their hood. The figure's voice was low and gravelly, sending a shiver down Naunun's spine. "You've been busy, diviner." Naunun's hand instinctively went to the diviner's will strapped to his arm. "Who are you?" The figure chuckled, a sound that was neither warm nor comforting. "A friend, or perhaps a warning. The Fayed are watching you, Naunun. They know something is amiss. If you value your life, and the lives of your students, you will tread carefully." Before Naunun could respond, the figure melted into the crowd, leaving him alone with his thoughts. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with possibilities. Who had sent the stranger? The Fayed? The Academy? Or someone else entirely? He looked back at Cayrin, his resolve hardening. He had made a choice to protect the boy, and he would not falter now. But as the lanterns flickered and the music swelled, Naunun couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were closing in. The weeks that followed were fraught with tension. Naunun's lessons became more intense, his warnings more frequent. He drilled his students on control, on discipline, on the importance of keeping their magic in check. But Cayrin's restlessness only grew. The boy's curiosity was aflame, and no amount of caution could extinguish it. One night, as Naunun prepared to retire to his hut, he heard a faint noise outside. He opened the door to find Cayrin standing there, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Master Naunun, I need your help." Naunun's heart sank as he saw the blood on the boy's sleeve. "What have you done?" Cayrin's voice was barely a whisper. I tried to see what would happen if I used my blood. I thought I could control it, but..." Naunun grabbed the boy's arm, his stomach churning as he saw the jagged cut. The blood was dark, almost black, and it pulsed faintly with an unnatural light. He cursed under his breath, pulling Cayrin inside and slamming the door shut. "You fool! Do you have any idea what you've done?" Cayrin's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to understand." Naunun's anger faded, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. He had seen this before, in the faces of others who had been consumed by their own power. "Sit down," he said gently, guiding the boy to a chair. "I will fix this. But you must promise me, Cayrin. No more experiments. No more risks. Do you understand?" Cayrin nodded, though his eyes remained distant. Naunun's hands trembled as he worked to heal the wound, his magic weaving through the boy's flesh like a thread. But even as the cut closed, he knew the damage had already been done. The Fayed would come. They always did. The storm broke on a moonless night. Naunun was awakened by the sound of footsteps outside his hut, heavy and deliberate. He rose from his bed, his heart pounding as he reached for the diviner's wheel. The door burst open, and a group of Fayed warriors stepped inside, their faces masked and their weapons gleaming in the dim light. "Naunun of Ors," their leader said, his voice cold and unyielding. "You are accused of harboring a Haima mage. Surrender the boy, and your death will be swift." Naunun's mind raced, He had prepared for this moment, but the reality was far worse than he had imagined. He glanced at Cayrin, who stood frozen in the corner, his eyes wide with fear. The boy's bloodline was no longer a secret. "You will not take him," Naunun said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "He is just a child." The Fayed leader stepped forward, his blade glinting in the darkness. "A child with the power to destroy us all. Step aside, diviner. This is your final warning." Naunun's hands tightened around the diviner's wheel. He had spent his life running from his past, from the mistakes that had haunted him. But now, as he stood between the Fayed and the boy he had sworn to protect, he knew there was no turning back. The room erupted in chaos as Naunun unleashed his magic, the diviners while spinning wildly in his hands. The Fayed warriors lunged at him, their blades slicing through the air, but Naunun was faster. His magic surged, a torrent of light and shadow that sent the warriors stumbling back. "Run, Cayrin," he shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "Run and don't look back." The boy hesitated, his eyes filled with tears. "I can't leave you. You must." Naunun's voice broke as he turned to face the Fayed once more. "This is my burden, not yours. Go." Cayrin turned and fled, his footsteps echoing in the night. Naunun watched him go, a bittersweet smile on his lips. He had failed so many before, but he would not fail this time. As the Fayed closed in, he raised the diviner's will one last time, its spokes glowing with the light of 1,000 stars. The last thing he saw was the boy disappearing into the darkness, his future uncertain but free. And as the Fayed's blade pierced his heart, Naunun whispered a final prayer to the gods he had long since stopped believing in. "Protect him." The night swallowed Cayrin as he ran, his breath ragged and his heart pounding in his chest. The village of ores blurred around him, the familiar huts and pathways now alien and menacing under the pale light of the stars. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away. Naunun's voice echoed in his mind, sharp and desperate. "Run and don't look back." But he couldn't help it. He glanced over his shoulder, just once, and saw the faint glow of magic erupting from Naunun's hut. The air crackled with energy, and for a moment, the night was illuminated by a blinding flash of light. Then silence. The glow faded, leaving only darkness. Cayrin stumbled, his legs giving out as he collapsed to his knees in the sand. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the salt of the sea breeze. Naunun was gone. He knew it in his bones. The man who had been his teacher, his protector, his only ally in a world that would see him dead, was gone. And it was his fault. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. The cut on his arm, the one he had made in his foolish attempt to understand his power, throbbed faintly. He could still feel the strange energy coursing through him, a dark and primal force that seemed to whisper in the back of his mind. It terrified him, but it also called to him, a siren song he couldn't ignore. "Cayrin." The voice was soft, almost gentle, but it made him jump. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around the beach. There, standing a few paces away, was a figure cloaked in shadows. The same figure Naunun had spoken to at the festival. The stranger lowered their hood, revealing a face that was both familiar and alien. Their eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the dark, and their skin bore the faint markings of ancient runes. "Who are you?" Cayrin demanded, his voice trembling. "What do you want?" The figure stepped closer, their movements slow and deliberate. "I am called Cale, and I've been watching you, Cayrin. You have a gift, one that the world fears, but one that could change everything." Cayrin took a step back, his heart racing. "I don't want it. I never asked for this." Cale's lips curved into a faint smile. "Few ever do. But the gods do not ask for permission when they bestow their blessings, or their curses. You are Haima, Cayrin. The blood magic flows through you, whether you will it or not. You can run from it, but it will always find you." Cayrin shook his head, his chest tightening. "Naunun said it was dangerous. He said it would get me killed." Naunun was right, Cale said, their voice tinged with regret. But he also knew that you could not hide forever. The Thaid will not stop until you are found. They fear what you represent. A power they cannot control. Cayrin's mind raced. He didn't trust the stranger, but he couldn't deny the truth in their words. Naunun was gone, and he was alone. The Thaid would come for him, and he had nowhere to run. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cale's smile widened, though it held no warmth. "I want to help you, to teach you how to control your power so that you may survive and perhaps one day thrive. But the path will not be easy. It will demand everything from you." Cayrin hesitated. He thought of Naunun, of the sacrifices the man had made to protect him. He thought of his parents, who had no idea what he truly was. And he thought of the Thaid, their blades gleaming in the dark. He had no choice. If he wanted to live, he would have to embrace the very thing that made him a target. "Teach me," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "But if you betray me, I'll—" Cale held up a hand, silencing him. "There will be no betrayal, Cayrin. We are bound by the same fate. The Thaid hunt us both. Together, we may yet find a way to survive." The days that followed were a blur. Cale led Cayrin away from the coast, into the dense forests that lay beyond the villages. They traveled by night, avoiding the main roads and the prying eyes of travelers. Cale taught Cayrin to mask his presence, to dampen the energy that radiated from him. It was exhausting work, but Cayrin was a quick learner. The blood magic that had once felt like a curse began to feel like a tool, one that he could wield, if only he had the strength. But the lessons were not without cost. Cale pushed him to his limits, forcing him to confront the darkest corners of his power. They practiced in secluded clearings, far from civilization, where the trees whispered secrets and the earth seemed to pulse with life. Cayrin learned to draw strength from his own blood, to shape it into weapons and shields. He learned to sense the life force of others, to manipulate it with a touch. It was intoxicating, but it also filled him with a deep, gnawing guilt. "You must not fear your power," Cale said one night, as Cayrin struggled to control a surge of energy that threatened to overwhelm him. "Fear is the enemy. It will cloud your mind and weaken your resolve." "But what if I hurt someone?" Cayrin asked, his voice strained. "What if I lose control?" Cale's expression softened, though their eyes remained hard. "Then you will learn from your mistakes. The path of Haima is not one of purity, Cayrin. It is one of survival. You must be willing to do whatever it takes to protect yourself." Cayrin nodded, though the words left a bitter taste in his mouth. He didn't want to hurt anyone. But as the days turned into weeks, he began to understand the truth of Cale's words. The Thaid were relentless. They tracked him through the forests, their presence a constant shadow at the edge of his awareness. More than once, he and Cale were forced to fight, their magic clashing with the Thaid's blades in bursts of light and shadow. Each battle left Cayrin drained, his body aching and his mind clouded with doubt. But he grew stronger, his control over his power more precise. And with each victory, he felt the weight of Naunun's sacrifice pressing down on him. He couldn't let it be in vain. The final confrontation came on a night when the moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting long shadows across the forest. Cayrin and Cale had taken refuge in an abandoned temple, its crumbling walls covered in ancient runes. They thought they were safe, but the Thaid had found them. The warriors surrounded the temple, their masks gleaming in the moonlight. Their leader stepped forward, his voice cold and unyielding. "Cayrin of Ivon, you are charged with the crime of practicing forbidden magic. Surrender, and your death will be swift." Cayrin stood at the temple's entrance, his hands trembling but his resolve steady. Cale stood beside him, their eyes glowing with a fierce light. "This ends tonight," Cale said, their voice low and dangerous. The battle was fierce. The Thaid fought with the precision of trained warriors, their blades slicing through the air with deadly accuracy. But Cayrin and Cale were no longer the hunted. They fought as one, their magic intertwining in a dance of light and shadow. Cayrin's blood sang as he wielded his power, shaping it into weapons and shields with a skill he hadn't known he possessed. But the Thaid were relentless. One by one they fell, but their numbers seemed endless. And then, as Cayrin turned to face a new opponent, he saw him, the Thaid leader, his blade raised high. The man lunged, his weapon aimed straight at Cayrin's heart. Time seemed to slow. Cayrin's mind raced, his instincts screaming at him to act. He reached deep within himself, drawing on the power that had always terrified him. His blood burned as he shaped it into a blade of pure energy, its light blinding. He swung, the blade meeting the Thaid's with a deafening clash. The Thaid leader staggered back, his mask cracking as the force of the blow sent him to his knees. Cayrin stepped forward, his blade poised to strike. But as he looked into the man's eyes, he hesitated. The Thaid leader was no monster, he was just a man, doing what he believed was right. "Do it," the man said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "End it." Cayrin's hand trembled. He thought of Naunun, of the sacrifices the man had made to protect him. He thought of Cale, who had taught him to embrace his power. And he thought of himself, of the boy he had been and the man he was becoming. He lowered his blade. "No," he said, his voice firm. "I won't." The Thaid leader stared at him, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "You are not what we feared," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps we were wrong." The remaining Thaid hesitated, their weapons lowering as they looked to their leader. The man rose to his feet, his mask falling away to reveal a face lined with age and weariness. "Go," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Leave this place and do not return. But know this. If you ever misuse your power, we will find you." Cayrin nodded, his heart pounding. He turned to Cale, who stood silently beside him. "It's over," he said, his voice trembling with relief. Cale's expression was unreadable. "For now," they said. "But the path ahead will not be easy. The world will not soon forget what you are." Cayrin knew they were right. The Thaid might have spared him, but there would always be others who feared his power. He would have to be careful, to hide in plain sight and guard his secret closely. But for the first time he felt a glimmer of hope. He had faced his greatest fear and emerged stronger. As the Thaid disappeared into the night, Cayrin turned to Cale. "What now?" he asked. Cale's lips curved into a faint smile. "Now," they said, "we begin again." And so, Cayrin walked into the unknown, his heart heavy with the weight of his past but filled with the promise of his future. The road ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but he was no longer the boy who had fled into the night. He was Haima, and he would carve his own path, one drop of blood at a time.